Greetings, everybody. Thank you for joining me, Dave LaMont, with your Nooner on a Monday. I've got not one but two wonderful guests waiting in the bullpen, and I'll get to them in just a couple of minutes. And a couple of guys who know this area as well as anyone. In fact, I need to plug in my little headset so I can listen to what they have to say, because I don't want to miss that, and neither do you. Around the country, and I know these guys are more than qualified to talk about this, today is the day, especially when we get to the NFL, because there's so few games, and college football, because there are so few games, especially this year. Everybody goes into either a giddy sense of overdeveloped joy or absolute terrorized, sleepless panic over how their professional and or college football teams did over the weekend. If you are a Detroit Lions fan, it's this typical despair. You should probably be used to it by now. Dallas Cowboy fans, who were very smackful, took a little bit of a smack around. But does that mean it's going to be a lousy season for them? Tampa Bay, does that mean it's going to be a lousy season for them? It is just one game. But it's always humorous to me, the incredible overreactions that happen in these situations. When your team loses a game in a first best of seven playoff series and it's game one, oh, we're done. We're out in 5 games. Maybe they'll win one. I think they're going to get swept. You don't ever think, like the Denver fans, that you're at a game 7 now after being down 3-1, after probably going, nah, we're good. We're good. Nothing going on here. I got nothing. I can't do anything about this. It's hilarious in a way. It kind of shows that no matter what, there's still that sports obsession that goes on that we all have. And same with your little fantasy football teams. I got one. I got suckered into one after announcing my retirement, but I had a good day. Does that mean I'm going to whip through everybody else? No. Does that mean the person whom I beat is going to have a lousy year? No. It's just one day, one game, one stretch of a few hours. And what we all assume is that it's never going to get any better. For a losing team, that it's just never going to get any better. There's no way they can improve. And in some cases, this will prove to be right. But not all of them, not many of them. And it's the same thing with the college teams. We have teams with new coaches. We have teams that maybe got off to shaky starts, especially teams in the Big 12 who were beaten by several Sun Belt teams. And by the way, Louisiana is a very good program. They've won, I believe, 10 games last year. So they know how to win. But now their fans are in this horrible state of despair that nothing right will ever happen to them again as long as they live. It's not true, but does make for a good narrative. And it makes for good business for the two guys I have waiting in the bullpen. Your co-hosts of the Defo show on 9:40 a.m. Let me see if I can bring them in one by one. There they are. The man in the middle is, of course, the esteemed producer, longtime producer, Mike Lubitz, and on my right, and as well, a guy I've known. I've trying to figure it out, Defo. I think it's about 35 years, starting when we were in different radio stations. I don't know if we've ever been on the same radio station, but the folks, I think I don't have to remind you of that, is Jeff DeForrest. Have we ever actually been on the same frequency?
It's possible. We've been on the same wavelength. I know that for a fact because I've been punching away at highlight much like you have back in the past, screaming at Joe, "He dropped it, you son of a..."
He never did.
Oh, it's always great to be, and this is an honor for us. Trust me, I didn't know Louie had such a great haircut, though. What the hell would you use a weed whacker on that head? What is that? Hey, I haven't seen this guy in like 6 months. It's amazing.
He
came by to pick up certain inebriants at the house when the pandemic first broke out, knowing
understandable. And he knew where to go, didn't he?
Yes. He came right to the source, as they say. I'm like the Stu Piner of drugs, but nonetheless, great to be on with you. This is a nice little thing. I didn't know how to work one of these things. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to log on, but I managed with the help of my dog here, Holly, in the background. She punched up the right buttons, and it's great to be on with you, Dave. It's always an honor.
No, thank you. And thank you for all the time you've been so generous to me and inviting me on your program as well, as I try to put together things here at the last minute. There is a decent chance that you guys will hear my dog occasionally.
Nice.
But this
is a dog track.
No. Do they still have dog track?
Favorite remote location, the dog track. It's always great.
Yeah. Boy, that's one of the many things that has changed around here. That's for sure, is the pari-mutuel situation. Dania Highlight just announcing that they're still not ready to bring their guys back to play in the pandemic. But that's not why we're here. Although I suspect we will degenerate into degenerate conversation as the morning or the afternoon goes on. You heard me talk. I know you guys have dealt with it. What was the tone of what you heard from your folks today about what happened? First off, with the Dolphins. What did you guys hear today?
Luby, you're all over this thing. And the king of pessimism right here, the prince of pessimism, Luby, of course, has written off the season. What do you think?
Well, nowadays you get the tone of the world is from Twitter. And it feels like Dolphin fans are on the same page in the sense that our expectations weren't high. But
Right.
if it's going to be low like this, then why not have Tua out there? So it's sort of like I've learned from Defo, if you're going to be bad, be exciting. And that game was as dreadful as anything we've seen. So, I mean, even Tannehill, it was a little bit more like there was nothing. Both sides of the ball, the Patriots are going to just run it a lot and they'll find a way to score 3 touchdowns. And the Dolphins, and that's the thing and that's the big question now with Brian Flores coming out and saying Tua's healthy. Okay, if he's healthy, like, why would we watch this with an old man when we can watch hopefully something more fun with a young guy?
Jeff, why do you think he goes with 50? Just because it's the Patriots and he wants to give him a little – I mean, I don't know. Why would you do that?
I think it's kind of unusual circumstances. I don't know that we need to panic yet and pull the trigger on Tua. I wouldn't mind seeing him. I think he's the most exciting development here in a long time. We don't know if he can last. We're not sure. And we've discussed it many times with you, Dave. I mean, the guy is a winner, and he adds a buzz and a sizzle, and we haven't had that here since Danny Boy was drafted. So I'm looking forward to seeing him. They always say this. I guess it's cliche, and you've been involved in sports talk forever. Hey, yeah, the coaches, they see him every day in practice. We know what Fitzpatrick is. He's an old man. He's a gutsy player. You have to love the guy out of Harvard with the big beard, gives it everything he has. He's running around like Joe Cap out there. Unfortunately, he's throwing the ball like Joe Cap. And, you're not really giving yourself a great chance to develop the guy. I'm not a big believer. When you were sitting on the sideline, sitting out some of those games when we used to play those 4-and-4 on Sundays, you don't really get anything out of sitting on the sidelines and watching somebody else get clobbered. So you want to be in action. So I think you learn on the job. I just think this year was a little unusual with no preseason and the weird way that they had to conduct the practices. Maybe he just doesn't have enough work yet to be comfortable out there. And so if they wait a couple of weeks, it won't kill anybody.
And I don't know if you really want to throw him out there against New England. I think that may have had something to do with it. Fitzpatrick at least knows a Belichick defense, knows what to expect. Of course, so does Brian Flores, since he coordinated those defenses for a few years. And don't forget, to be fair to Fitzpatrick, he did play pretty well down the stretch during their little mini win streak that ended up not ruining their chances to getting to us. So maybe he deserves the first opportunity, but 3 interceptions will get you a seat on the bench very, very quickly.
Well, and that's the thing that Brian Flores openly said. Look, even though he's healthy, we still are, concerned, quote unquote, about the hip. And I get it. No preseason, minimal offseason. You're going to go with the veteran. And I'm sure they have their plan, and I get it. But when you're watching the old guy do that, I'm curious how long you can watch the old guy be as bad as, okay, if Tua does that, fine. At least he's a young guy learning. We'll get to it, I'm sure, but it's what I'm watching with my Florida State Seminoles. If you're going to be bad, fine. Be bad young. I'd rather you be bad young. There's no need to be bad old. You get nothing from that.
Right. You don't want to get the guy killed. I think we've seen this with the Heat, that journeyman players tend to resort more back into being journeymen than they do measuring up to the one special season that they had. We saw that with James Johnson. He went back to being a journeyman. We saw that with Deion Waiters, back to being a journeyman. And then Hassan Whiteside, the human enigma, that turned out to be a very unfortunate signing. All of a sudden, you're stuck. And if you're thinking that Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to become all of a sudden a stellar quarterback, he's a journeyman. He is what he is. So you know what you were going to get from him? I don't think it was the end of the world that they started him in game number 1. I think obviously this is another developmental season for the Dolphins. We just thought they would have developed a little bit faster because last year was a pretty good springboard for hope and optimism.
All right, so it's interesting you said that about you look at it as a developmental season because I don't remember, guys, a wider range of predictions for a Dolphins team than this season because you had people like Peter King predicting they would win the division, which could still happen. And you had others who had them, I think, what did Vegas say?
When he predicted that?
No, he did. He had them. There are some people who thought this was a playoff team based on what I talked about, improvement, and based on the way they finished. There are others who had them tamped down to 6-7 wins, missing the playoffs, but improving. this can all of those things can still happen. But what did Vegas have, Defo, for over-under on wins? You remember?
I think it was 6 and a hook, which wasn't unrealistic. Although, I don't know. I would have been inclined to take the over. Here's the thing, though. Did the Dolphins make a move too soon? This was Boris Spassky, facing Bobby Fischer, where maybe he moved that pawn out there too soon because they went all in on free agency. They signed a ton of free agents. And, the draft was a giant haul, supposedly. So we'll see. Some of these guys should surface. You thought maybe they had expedited the process, maybe moved it up a year. I mean, it may still happen. It's too early to tell. And who knows what anybody had in the tank going into week number 1 of this NFL season. I don't think anybody could have predicted much. That's why my bookie, Louis Lipschitz, is living over in the south of France right now. He knew that week number 1 would be a catastrophe for a lot of people. And it certainly had to be, although you did see some decent quality play. That was surprising, and less flags being thrown. So it was less obnoxious of a presence with the officials, and I think that made a big difference also in the play in the NFL this week. It was pretty exciting, I would have to say.
Well, let's look, Mike, specifically at the game and some of the same themes that were an issue that haunted this team last year, like the inability to stop the run, is there still, even though Christian Wilkins played a pretty good game. The edge, in other words, in some ways, it looked a little bit like a game from last year.
Yep. Well, and that's the thing is Defo said it, and I almost forgot. If you wanted us to keep expectations low, then you shouldn't have spent more than anyone in the offseason. You only do that supposedly when you're ready to take that next step. But everything we saw with our eyes is a team that's still rebuilding. You bring in Calvin, you bring in Byron Jones. I mean, why? Because it seems like neither did anything. The linebacking core has been an issue for so long. We joked around about Koamisi and this guy and that guy. It seemed like the same linebacking core. The guys who were supposed to stop the run, Christian Wilkins actually did his job. He played well.
Right.
But the linebackers are still nowhere to be found. It feels like, and I love him on the radio down here, but Channing Crowder's still running out there in the linebacking core. We've been begging for a Zach Thomas for the last, 15 years? 10, 15 years, and it still feels like we're missing that. And they went and spent all that money, and it still feels like they have the same inefficiencies.
The other thing, Defo, is offensively. The one thing that I have noticed, can you name that we saw in this game and for the last several years, a truly exciting offensive player?
Well, maybe Devontae Parker might be emerging as that towards the end of last year. It was his final year of the 4-year deal that he got as a rookie, and people were bitterly disappointed, I think, for the most part. He showed signs of life a couple of years back with Tannehill, then seemed to regress. But last year, at the end of the year, he was really a catalyst. He was a big spark for this Dolphin team, and I was impressed. He could make the difficult catch, and he could do a lot of different things. He was versatile. I don't know, he had 4 catches in this game on 4 targets and then hurt his hamstring. But the passing game wasn't going well anyway, and Fitzpatrick was clearly off target unless he was colorblind like Vinny Testaverde and decided he was going to throw the ball mostly to Patriots. And Luby brought up a good point. I mean, is Stephen Ross pulling lint out of his pocket right now? They spent so much money in free agency. That's why I thought maybe they were expediting the process just a little bit. But you'd have to say it was disappointing what we saw in game 1. And they don't really have any superstars. That wasn't exactly Zonk, Merck, and Jim Kick running the football. Who was that?
That's my point.
Curly. They had some guy named Howard. I recognized no names on that offense.
Well, that's my point. Unless you're a hardcore fantasy football player, a lot of those names don't ring a bell. Matt Breida hardly even got off the bench. He seems to be now, he could be the new number 3 running back. Preston Williams shows some promise, but we're still waiting on all of that. That's my whole point. There's not a player where if you're a defensive coordinator, you go, oh, crap, I got to deal with this guy. If you're playing the Packers, you got to worry about Devontae Adams going off, and he did yesterday. There are other players around the league. You can name them receivers and running backs where you're like, oh, geez, if we can stop this guy or limit him, we're going to be, we have a better chance of winning. And I don't see a player on the Dolphins that would keep a coordinator up past his bedtime.
Well, and the funny thing is, Defo brought him up. Devontae Parker, until the middle of last year, was bust. He was the first-round pick. Why? You got a receiver out of Louisville who was already injury-prone. Good job, Dolphins. Good job, Tannenbaum. Good job, Dolphins. And then he was great. The second half of the year, he was one of the best receivers in football. But, of course, a la Devontae Parker, he gets hurt again. So you can't really count on him. Albert Wilson was supposed to be a spark plug. Well, Albert Wilson tapped out, so he's not there. Right. My question is why Mike Gesicki and Ryan Fitzpatrick had this really good synergy near the end of the year last year. Mike Gesicki made some plays yesterday. Like, he actually is a monster. Like, we talked to him on Radio Row. He's a big dude, and he's a physical dude, and he'll go up and get the ball. Where was he? Where was Jakeem Grant? The dude, he gets a new contract. He is athletic. He's fast. He's the new way Tyreek Hill kind of receiver. What do you have? Two? Like, the Dolphins, that's my problem with bringing back a Chan Gailey. Like, I don't understand what happened with Chad O'Shea. Like, he must have really been a jerk because he got this offense looking good by the end of the year. Like, Ryan Fitzpatrick looked good by the end of the year. And Chan Gailey is like the 1980s. Like, the offense was so slow. Like, it was boring. And I feel like that's what Gailey wants. And it's not what they have talent at receiver. You're actually, it's not that you're wrong, Dave. You're right from what you saw. But
right. In other words, who's stretching the field? I mean, who's the threat?
Williams can. Jakeem Grant can. They didn't do it. And I put that on Chan Gailey as much as I put that on the actual talent.
How much do you put on the respect, Defo, for New England? And the fact that they are, let's face it, whether you like him or not, that's the 305th win for Bill Belichick. So clearly, defensively, he has a philosophy of taking away your stud. And that's always been the way it's worked. And 6 rings later, it's still working.
Well, and going against Chan Gailey also. I mean, what Stone Age era was that offense from? They were running there. And Chan Gailey, I met him actually, and I sort of had a negative impression because he was with the Cowboys, and I hate anything to do with the Cowboys. So I thought, well, who is this goofball country hillbilly that's coming in to run a Dolphins offense? And turned out to be a very knowledgeable, astute, well thought out conversationalist. I really enjoyed talking to him. But when they brought him back, I thought, why not just bring back Larry Holmes to see if he can win the heavyweight championship? I mean, maybe he was good at one time, but I think, that ship has sailed. So, I was surprised they brought him back as the offensive coordinator. It didn't seem like a very progressive move with the lean towards all of these young coaches that have all of these analytics and remember every play going back to when they were a 3-year-old. I don't know that Chan remembers what he had for breakfast this morning. Not to condemn the old, because I'm still working, you're still working, although you're a much younger man, Dave. And so there's a lot to be said for having passion for what you do. But I don't know, maybe he's a quarterback whisperer, and they saw him as somebody who could be some kind of tutor and mentor to Tanga Bailoa along with Fitzpatrick. So if that's part of the plan, then you have to be patient a little bit and see how it works out. But as far as a game day offensive coordinator, Belichick was probably, he might have been smoking weed with Stephen F. from the grave there. But, he had to think this was the easiest week he ever had. I bet he already had his game plan in hand for Seattle, which is going to be a much bigger challenge for the Patriots. But he can, it's the old thing you used to read in the media guide there for the Dolphins. Harvey Green, thank you very much for quoting the great Bum Phillips. He can take his in and beat urine, which I always thought was a little bit obscene, but he can do it. And he can win with anybody. It was Giselle all along is what we found out. It was Giselle all along was the problem there with Brady and Belichick and the whole departure.
Well, all right. One of the other things Chan Gailey used to do was coach Georgia Tech. And if Luby thought he was getting out of this one unbruised.
No, I don't think I am.
That's why you got the haircut. It was on a bet that he lost.
Chan Gailey cut it.
Yeah.
All right.
He might have cut it himself, missed his neck.
For those who don't know, Mike is a Florida State. You're an alum, too, in addition to being a big fan.
I'm a legacy, and I'm a 2-time alum, yes.
So, obviously, Mike has a great passion for Florida State football. It did not go well. I didn't realize James Blackman, who was a teammate of Charlie Ward's the year Ward was on the high school, is still there. Okay? I didn't realize that. So they start rolling down the field. They pick up a quick 10 against a Georgia Tech team that certainly seems to be on the build.
On the man,
and then the rest would happen. What did you get out of that? Which was a surprise to a lot of people.
What's funny is your opening soliloquy. I feel like I wanted to go. You don't have to talk to me so directly, Dave LaMont.
Well, I was.
You punished him, David. You punished him.
But what I realize is, as funny as it is, because Defo again isn't on Twitter, I'm like logical as an FSU. Some FSU fans. Defo joked about this morning about how I had the Fire Mike Norvell page up. I didn't. I haven't. I didn't do it with Taggart. It took till the last game for me to go, okay. I mean, there's no progress. To me, I'm not dumb. Like, this was the weirdest offseason in sports, not in football, not in college, sports. College football was even harder because half the time we didn't know we were going to play. So like kids weren't on campus. They weren't practicing when they were practicing. Georgia Tech supposedly wasn't even doing contact drills, and FSU was barely doing it. So and then you have a new regime. So you can't have high expectations. So it's not like I was expecting anything, but for me, the most important thing, and both of my football teams is what I'm looking for. I want growth. I want progress. And that's the thing that bothered me about that game. The defense wasn't dominant like it should have been, but it was better. Like you held an ACC team to 13. Yeah, it's a true freshman starting. Yeah, Georgia Tech. Okay, you still held them to 13. Okay, last year they probably would have given up 30 points. So I'll take the 13, fine. The offense, you said it, was the same offense. Like there was no difference. Willie Taggart could have stayed with Kendall Briles to have that offense. And James Blackman was a nice kid. And he really is a team leader, and he tries, and I give him credit. Like he takes it on himself when he plays really poorly. But much like Ryan Fitzpatrick, we know who he is. The dude holds on to the ball way too long. He misses reads but he finally spots a guy. He throws it late and over his head. He takes too many sacks. He has too many turnovers. He's not willing to tuck it and run. He doesn't get rid. It reminds me a lot of Tannehill. Like the dude doesn't suck, but he misses so much that your team has to rely on the defense way too much. And as we've seen in sports, especially in Florida, it's too hot for that. Like to expect your defense to pitch shutouts. This isn't the 1990s with Marvin Jones. Like you're going to have to move the ball, and you got to get your defense keep your defense off the field. And James Blackman doesn't do it. And that's my problem is I'm not running for the hills. I didn't expect much more, but I do expect to see the young kids. Like if you're going to be bad, the linebacker core still sucks. It's been an issue since they won a title in 2014. So go with the young kids. They have a kid, Steven Dix Jr.
But are those kids ready?
And that's the thing. Are they ready? Well, like Defo said, we've learned from watching Florida State. They're not getting ready sitting on the sideline. They're just not. And if you're going to be bad young. Like at least young kids like Jeff Sims in that game. He wasn't great, but by the end of the game, he looked better than he did at the beginning. And by the end of the year, I'm sure Jeff Sims will look better than he did at the beginning. James Blackman doesn't. So go with Tate Rodemaker until Chubba Purdy was their big quarterback recruit is hurt. Throw him out there. Okay, he'll be horrible. Blackman was horrible. Like if you're going to be horrible, maybe he'll take chances Blackman will not take. Maybe he'll run instead of just standing there and eating a sack. Like I'd rather be exciting. I'd rather be different. I'd rather be fun than the same old story.
Well, the issue becomes Mike Norvell going with what he thinks is the best group. And again, you mentioned it, the camps were weird and college doesn't play preseason. In fact, normally Florida State would have opened. Actually, weren't they supposed to play Boise State this year?
They're supposed to open at Boise.
Ooh, that would have been horrifying. But normally Florida State's been brave in their scheduling more than some schools, but sometimes they would just play, a weaker school where they could work some of this stuff out. That opportunity's not there. That's a conference loss. And against one of the teams that's not forecast to be one of the stronger ones in the conference. It's how much rope slack, I should probably say, does Norvell get, given the fact that Taggart, I don't think, 2 years, people were sour on him from the beginning and failing to perhaps realize that he walked into a situation from what was left, the stink that was left behind by Jimbo Fisher, which was not a pleasant odor in Tallahassee at all.
Well, and it's what I would ask you. It's what I've learned from some of my more logical FSU fan friends. They're like, look, here's the deal. If you keep doing that, then you become a job that no one wants.
Exactly. Thank you.
So, Chris Landry talked to Defo and I about this last week. It's like fans, and I didn't cut, and you and I fought about the Penn State job versus Florida State. And I didn't believe Florida State was a great job because of me. I believed it because pundits had said, look, it's the best recruiting base in the country. They've won with 2 different coaches. They've won recently. Their alumni are willing to spend to the point where they paid the biggest buyout ever. So it's not Miami. Like, it's a good job. And even when Jimbo was not recruiting at all his last year, they had the 9th recruiting class. So you can automatically, naturally recruit there. And that's what wins. So to me, it's like, okay, then I guess it's a really good job. So to just pick off some group of 5 guy was frustrating. But the thing that proved Norvell to me at least was his track record of hiring coaches. So, but you got to let the coaches coach. Like,
right. And again, Defo, you heard this all morning, of course, both on and off the air, I am sure. But we go back to Overreaction Monday. I understand
My
why
favorite
Florida
day of the week, by the way.
Yeah.
My favorite day of the week by far.
Seriously, folks don't realize for a talk show host, when a local team loses,
Defo's dream.
It's great.
Defo could walk in 5 seconds before going on the air because he already knows what the show is going to be.
Yep.
You know, when I did the morning show with Jimmy Cephalo and then Joe Rose on WQAM,
Original first team.
Yeah,
Great job. Yeah.
Cephalo and I. A Dolphin loss would give us 3 days of shows.
Yeah.
We would go till Wednesday. A win would get you like 2 hours on Monday, and you'd be going, "Wait a minute, what are we talking about for the next few days? Where's our our substance?"
Misery sells. It's funny too, because the reality of it is, and you know this, Dave, and Luby, you know this too. If your team is on a run where they go to the Super Bowl or the Stanley Cup playoffs or the NBA championship, it helps a lot more in the long run. But in general, misery sells. And in this town, the town without pity, the season of false hope is on here because, well, once again, here's the thing. I used to cover USC football. I bring this up a lot. I know we've talked about it. And if you saw the run that they had, this was in the 70s to the early 80s. They had phenomenal players. They were recruiting out of an immense base that was just populated with super talented kids. You would go to some obscure high school game and see Ronnie Lott playing safety, or you would find John Elway throwing a rock somewhere. I mean, they had incredible opportunities to recruit players, and they all wanted to go to USC. They had a great run there. I mean, tremendous, almost Syracuse-esque run of running backs. And you would never imagine that they could go into the crapper and be there and be either mediocre to okay. Maybe they show signs of life, then they go back. They go through a ton of coaches. You would never think they'd still be there today. I mean, this is 40 years later. And that's the thing I keep coming back to with the University of Miami, Florida State with Bobby Bowden, and then later on, I guess Jimbo was able to benefit and bring a championship there. And the University of Florida seems to be maybe in the best position to bounce back of all of them. But that glory era that we saw in the 80s, after Schnelly took over with UM, and then Bowden was going head-to-head, and he did that whole thing where he went out and took on really tough opponents on the road, then started beating them, then they started dropping them, and then all of a sudden, he was in a national championship picture every year. I don't think we're ever going to see that at that level again. So maybe you have to kind of curb your enthusiasm and just hope that, well, let's get good and see what can happen there. And who's on the right path to do that? I don't know. Is Manny Diaz going to make Miami that? Maybe, but it's never going to be like it was. So if that's what you're looking for, it's not happening. It's the old Roberta Flack thing, trying to get that feeling again. And I don't know that we're ever going to see it like that with any of those three schools again, where they were just monsters year after year after year, because the tide has shifted to some other schools. Maybe they'll come back around, but the longer you're out of it, the tougher it is to get back into it.
Well, Florida looks by far to be the best position for anybody to make any kind of a serious run this year, unless somehow they underachieve. They were a strong team last year. They've done it slowly, getting better under Mullen. Again, another place that doesn't have a hard time getting talent to show up. They get seemingly every good defensive back out of South Florida. Just from down the road.
One trip around campus does it for any recruit. That's it. You see the Babich there; it's unbelievable. I mean, I don't know. Charlie Pell, I think he used to, funnel a few cheerleaders into the room.
He doesn't have to. You don't have to do it now. But
he had his own grant system also, which helped. But
well, yeah, Charlie. But Charlie did it the way they did it in the old days, when nobody really was that concerned with it. I don't know what point we became so self-righteous, but we, now. We have to worry about cream cheese on a bagel and some very unusual. I mean, I had things with my oldest son. The story I always tell, this is basketball, but this is still the NCAA. I was up, now this has got to be 5 years ago, doing a game in Kalamazoo, and I invited him to come in just to see the press box, say hi, this is what things look like, and whatever you want to do the rest of your day. That got so complicated, they had to have a compliance officer in the press box and they had a spread there, nothing fancy, but for the press box up there, it's not a big stadium, was a kind of a combination suite holder press facility. And so they had a little buffet set up for the media could use and also the suite holders. And he couldn't eat off of that. If he had taken a black away,
was Luby at the game?
If he had taken a black olive and put it on a Ritz, it would have been a violation. And ultimately, he ended up not coming because he had schoolwork to do, And in a way, I was kind of glad because it would have been a real headache for him. That's how self-righteous and silly we've gotten with this stuff. But you mentioned Charlie Pell. Good Lord. You were getting a new car on a Ritz cracker. Never mind, you know.
My friend Elmo, he's a big booster, and he's going to take care of you today. Don't worry about a thing. And have your parents come by. We have a racehorse. We bought them from Ocala. Yeah.
You know, in the recruiting of Joe Namath, and I don't know if Howard has admitted this. I think he has. Howard Schellenberger helped recruit Joe Namath to come to Alabama from Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, and wrote rubber checks to help pay for, not to Joe, but to help, you know, to facilitate things. And, you know, Alabama didn't go on probation. There wasn't anything like that. Namath went on and played, and we know the rest. So it is interesting how that has all shifted. All right. I wanted to ask.
Willie would cash those checks at the check cashing store, and they would immediately say, "He's from Howard."
Yeah,
they knew they were bogus.
I don't want to leave you guys without talking a little bit about the Miami Heat, who's sort of become the team of the moment. Although the Marlins may well be a playoff team, but that's going to be for another day. The Heat, major surprise, or did you see something in the way this team is constructed and the way that their mental toughness in this oddball situation would give them an advantage?
Luby, first you ought to apologize to Pat Riley before we even get started with this, Dave. He owes Pat Riley a giant apology. He thought Pat had lost his marbles when he signed all of those stiffs. But nobody is better, as we've been saying on the show.
Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo?
Johnson,
no, before this year.
No, these guys are good. I mean, the guys that he signed to those contracts that were strangling him, even the Mick was having to sell off cruise ship, although now that might not have been such a bad idea with this COVID-19. But we issued some apologies to Pat Riley. He's a great American. We didn't know if he was going to get out of it. But, you know, first he unloaded Shaq when Shaq was already a bloated shell of himself with $60 million left, when that was big money in the NBA. And then they unload Dion Waiters and James Johnson and Hassan Whiteside with a max contract at the time, fairly early into these contracts. So it was a stroke of genius, but he rebounded nicely. And Luby, I don't know if you wanted to apologize publicly. Dave's audience is unbelievable. And thank you, by the way, Dave, for mentioning the massive compensation package, because I heard that Costas wanted to get on the show this afternoon, and
he's out.
Said, "No, listen, Bob, I have no time for you right now." But
no, maybe he'll do like some retrospective on baseball and
something about Warren Spahn and no hitter. But what do you think, Luby? I'll let you. You're Mr. Heat. This is Luby Brown, ladies and gentlemen. Mike Luby, known as Luby Brown.
I look. I've done it many a times on our show, and Defo's not wrong. Your audience probably a little different than ours. I was very wrong. I apologize to Pat Riley. I fall to the mat that is there in front of the one and only Pat Riley. I'm as big a Heat fan as anyone, and I'm a big believer in Pat Riley as anyone. But the last couple of years, where anyone that showed any sign of life they gave a massive contract to was frustrating. Like we've seen in the NBA, Defo has sort of brought me back from the edge. Tanking doesn't necessarily win. In Philadelphia, the process is still a process. And another guy lost his job as a head coach because of the process, and it wasn't even his fault. So I understand taking doesn't necessarily work, but signing a bunch of middle-of-the-road guys and being middle of the road hasn't worked either. So I was really frustrated with the Heat coming into this year because it's like, okay, yeah, you got Jimmy Butler, but you had James Johnson and you had Deion Waiters, and before that you had Hassan Whiteside. And, like last year they had all these wastes of contracts. And Pat Riley, it's one thing he still can do, and I wasn't sure if he could because he's a little older. Like the dude's in his 70s. Like at some point,
I don't know if age matters because don't forget Andy Ellisberg is right there looking at the calculator 24 hours a day.
And it doesn't matter. And it's something I've learned from working with Defo every day, and he brings it to the same level now, even though he still worries about becoming an old man. He hasn't. He's as quick as anyone I know in the business. So age doesn't matter, but it's the only thing we have, like, okay, maybe he's getting up in age. That's why he's done this. No, he's still Pat Riley. And he got rid of all of the contracts, like all of them, and got back assets, like got back draft picks, got back cap space. And at the deadline, got back 2 players that have been as important for their roster in this playoff run, and Andre Iguodala and Jay Crowder. Like those 2 guys are the ones that are stopping Giannis, and are going to stop either Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, or Kemba Walker. And that's something Andy Ellisberg, who doesn't get any credit. Like Defo, I think, is the only person that actually mentions Andy Ellisberg in the public eye because no one knows. We just think of him as the numbers guy. He's the GM now. Like that dude knows basketball. And Nick Harrison isn't just Mickey's son. Like, the dude knows basketball, and Eric Spoelstra knows basketball. And the four of them worked together and molded this roster to the point where they're in the Eastern Conference Finals. They have a top 15 player in Jimmy Butler. Dragic looks like an all-star again.
Yep.
They have young core pieces in Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo who are studs. And they have a ton of money with the Miami backdrop. You know, like, that's something they didn't have coming into this year that I admit I was super wrong about. I thought they'd be a 6 to 8 seed, maybe fight with the Bucks to the Celtics in the first round, go out with their tail between their legs. They have a chance to win the title right now, which is ridiculous.
Absolutely. Defo, it's interesting because, look, I understand Whiteside, by the way. You have a big man who, when he's playing well, could dominate, block shots. And I know that's kind of an old-fashioned approach to the game, the way the three-point shot is taken over. But still, if you have a big body like that who looked as good as he could look, but the inconsistencies, all of the other stuff, he just was not a good fit for here. Other places, he's in Portland now, maybe that'll work out better for him here. But what's interesting is, you know, you mentioned the draft picks. They crushed it. Adebayo, Hero, who I think now already has 5 streets named after him in Miami-Dade County. You know, I joked the other day on Twitter that Tyler Hero, I think he's the guy who beat the Spurs with that game-winning shot in Game 6 in the NBA playoff in the finals against San Antonio. And he's become so popular. He's earned that popularity, by the way. So what are your thoughts on this series that's about to start tomorrow?
Well, I think it's a toss-up. I would give the Heat a shot, no question. I think Boston might be the slightly more accomplished team at this point. They have young guys that are also playoff tested. Now I have a dog issue here, too. I got to let this little dog out of the room here in a second. But nonetheless, they're in there with a shot against the Boston Celtics. You love the way they play as a team. We thought they were the old cliche was applicable with the Heat, that maybe they were a piece away before the season started. But I think that was neutralized with Milwaukee, especially because of the lack of home court advantage. And also the Greek Freak got hurt in the series, and that compromised them too. But it looked like the Heat were going to beat them, Greek or no Greek. I mean, they were up 3-0 with the Greek in the lineup, and they handled them in the first couple of games, and people kept doubting them. The line makers were making the Heat 5.5-point underdogs in Game 1, Game 2, and Game 3. So nobody really suspected that they were going to be able to knock off the chalk in the NBA. And yet Milwaukee had shown signs of vulnerability both before and after the restart of the season. So I thought they were in there with a good shot. Luby actually gave him a chance there, although he picked against them in 6 games in the Milwaukee series.
Hey, so did I, by the way.
Yeah,
so did
that's not an unpopular opinion, and you don't have to be ashamed of it. But this one looks like it might go 7 games, and 7 really hard-fought games, back and forth swing, and see who brings the goods to the table when finally this issue is settled. But the Heat are in there with a shot. Is it a surprise they would maybe go to the NBA Finals this year? I think yes, absolutely. As we all thought maybe these guys were going to take a little time to develop. But after whiffing on Devin Booker and taking Justice Winslow, an argument that I've had with Luby for the last several years, the guy, you can kind of tell. You call a lot of college basketball, and you played basketball to enough of a level of respectability that you know a good player when you see one. And you can kind of tell right away, it seems like. Usually you're not wrong about these things. And I saw Devin Booker, and I thought, wow, this guy's coming off the bench. He has a real bounce in his step. He can create his own shot, make a lot of things happen, even though he's just fulfilling a role, like a minor role with that Kentucky team his freshman year. And you saw the same thing maybe in Bam Adebayo, and to a lesser extent. The only thing disturbing and about Tyler Hero's game coming out of college was his three-point shooting percentage wasn't all that high. He shot like 35% on the college threes, which for you was a layup, Dave LaMont, because I saw you there.
Not anymore.
Father Time is the best defender. There's no question about it. You don't need Beverly on you. You can just go against Father Time. But that's my only concern. He seems to have adapted to the NBA game. He can do other things. He's much more versatile than just a chucker, and has evolved. And this Heat culture thing, I always thought culture was just something that developed in a yogurt that you had in your bachelor refrigerator for 6 years. But not being Louis Pasteur, I mean, there obviously is something to it, and it works for a lot of people. It doesn't work for some, but the guys they have on the roster now clearly seem to be all sold on the idea that, it's kind of a one for all and all for one mentality, and that can win. That can overcome better talent sometimes.
All right, man. Thank you so much.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I know.
Put cologne on for that? Are you kidding me?
And you smell magnificent, by the way, too. Well, listen, is there something that you would like to, besides promoting your radio show, is there something that we have left out of this menu here that you think should be talked about? This is go ahead, take over, man.
Take over.
I'll tell you one thing, David. You're in the business, and Luby knows this is true of me and my thoughts. I mean, it's unfortunate what's happened with sports coverage today because we've gone away from stories. We're seeing newspapers folding up, radio stations consolidating. Fortunately, you have forums like this where guys can develop their own individual approach to things, and I think it's wonderful that you're doing this. But these contrived controversies that seem to dominate the major networks all the time, where you have Fox with Bayless and you have ESPN with Stephen A. Smith, and they're always making up stuff. I mean, this offends me after a while. I don't know. You would think that Steve Nash was a card-carrying member of the Ku Klux Klan when he got this job, and that this was the worst atrocity ever, that you hired a two-time most valuable player in a couple of years where Shaq was dominating the NBA. And obviously a great team leader and a guy that has thorough understanding of the game and a relationship with the big superstars. So he gets the job, and all of a sudden you got to make something out of it. And people are calling each other names and back and forth and yelling and screaming. It's unfortunate that we've lost a lot of the essence of sports and the sports coverage that's out there and the opportunity to talk about it. So that's why I'm glad we have our format there on the radio for the 4 people that listen to AM radio. No one's driving to work anymore. We don't hear from a soul. We're out there just talking to the wind. But and it's great that this whole new sort of genre has developed itself so that maybe we can get back to some things that are more meaningful to people than just yelling and screaming about a contrived issue that was made up to begin with.
Yeah, and here's the problem. Bayless drew so much ire for his comments about Dak Prescott, which were unbelievably stupid. In a way, he won. Because what he got was what his goal was his attention. And a guy like that doesn't care if it's negative attention or positive attention. It's just attention. It's clicks. It's, look at that. I'm trending. Yeah. This is good. And even though Fox Sports came out and were critical, and I'm glad they were critical of his comments, secretly he won.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with it now, Jeff, is you can say a lot of what you want. Right. He didn't pay any kind of penalty for it. His reputation is largely either you hate him or you love him. So his reputation is going to be unchanged. If anything, probably he picked up more haters from people who've never even heard of him before, who didn't read these remarks and find out how bogus they really were. But that's and Jeff, it started when I was doing the show with Joe Rose, because Joe's thing was, let's stir it up. And sometimes, you would kind of fake an argument. You would take a side for the point of taking a side. And maybe you didn't even feel like it. Maybe you both agreed on something, but somebody had to be the bad guy, whether it was going to be him or me. That didn't happen that often, but contrived sells. Why is professional wrestling still on television? Contrived.
Well, that's real sport. Come on, Dave. Now you're treading on some really dangerous turf here.
You and I will have to talk. Don't forget, I was a wrestling manager.
You ever seen a fabulous Moolah? You wouldn't want to run into her in a dark alley, that's for sure.
If she's still in there, I don't think she's not.
No, she's got to be long gone by now. She was 7 years ago, I would say. Yeah.
As Neil Rogers used to say, she's not feeling too well right now.
No.
But
Luby and I don't agree on anything anyway. That's the beauty of our show. It's just natural. We don't have to contrive the argument.
Listen, Luby and I have had our moments too where we haven't seen eye to eye on it, but at least it's a respectful discussion and it's an honest discussion. And if we don't agree, we don't agree. That's fine. And it doesn't mean that I think we think we're bad people. That's the other thing about disagreements now. It becomes so personal.
Yep.
And it's extended beyond sports in the political arena and everything else, even to the point now where you post a review for something and somebody gets personal over who makes the best pizza in town. And I don't know I'm not sure how it got that way or when. It's been going on for a few years at least, but the intelligent discourse is just on the road.
People don't talk anymore. That's part of the problem. They don't communicate verbally. I mean, you're in the communication business. You're great at what you do. Play-by-play, you make it very personable and relatable when you're on the air with any broadcast that you do. We try to do the same thing. I mean, we are who we are. We're not pretentious about what's going on. We're wrong about a lot of things, and we're just in it to have a lot of fun. That's what sports was supposed to be, entertainment. But unfortunately now people don't talk, they don't communicate, they text. It's not even a full word anymore and never speaking in sentences. People don't read, newspapers are out of business, periodicals aren't what they were. I couldn't wait at one time to get my Sports Illustrated in the mailbox.
Oh, it's a mess.
Sport magazine was like once a month, and it couldn't come often enough for me to read the great articles and see the great photography. And you sort of were among the first to go behind the scenes and try to bring you other sides of sports stories. There are so many tremendous stories in sports. That's why it's a shame you get caught up in debates over whether or not you should kneel for the anthem and the team's not coming out of the locker room. It's mashugana. I mean, to sit there and have to debate all of this stuff, but when there's so many great things happening. And even over the last weekend, I mean, we're seeing a Cinderella story here with the Marlins, unbelievable, for a team that was, we walked into the Marlins press room at spring training boasting that we had laid money on the Marlins to win 25 games this year. And you should have seen the looks we got. It was like what you get from the doctor after your blood work comes back and they go, well, so you have a sweet tooth, huh, Mr. DeForrest? That kind of thing, when they give you the fisheye. And these are people in the organization, for God's sake, and yet they're writing a Cinderella story, and yet that will never get any attention. Unfortunately, Sixtomania is going without fans there. Otherwise, we'd see a lot more attention there. But there are just so many great stories, and unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is on the surface. And I think it does come back to people not communicating at the levels that they used to. So you can do anything to enhance that. Well, we'll go to our grave taking that philosophy, and most program directors would sit there and say, what is this, stream of consciousness? This isn't going to fly. We need to show it.
I need to start an argument on Twitter.
Yeah.
I know. I hear it. I don't like
Before
it.
we go, I just want to remind people, again, you can check us out 940 WINZ and 1230 The Zone AM. But we also are on iHeartRadio. Just put in the keyword Defo, DEFO. And you can also hit us up on Twitter at Defo Show, at LubyWINZ. And you can check out my podcast as well to cross promote, as my fiance makes me do. The Let's Get Real podcast. And I want to say before we go, I'm really happy that sports are back. Like, that's actually the one everyone's fighting all the time. But at least we're fighting over that now. We're back to stupid arguments instead of like this and that, the kneeling. And then we're back to the dumbass argument and not like who's the president and who, because people are stuck in those. Like, you're not going to change someone's opinion. So we're back to football. We had tennis, US Open. We have golf. We have baseball. We literally have everything. And I'm super stoked that it's all back. And hopefully we'll get some Big Ten football too. That's the only thing I would wanted to ask you was, how does the Big Ten not play? Like, if the ACC, the SEC, and the Big 12 play, how bad you look as the Big Ten to not play?
Well, don't forget the Pac-12. Nobody's criticizing the Pac-12, by the way. Do you hear any screaming about the Pac-12? Because they did a way better job of presenting why they're not playing than the Big Ten did. That's where the Big Ten screwed up. I find it hard to criticize people who are playing this safely. I really do. It would be great to have the Mountain West. It'd be great to have the MAC. It'd be great to have all these conferences together playing. But the Pac-12 laid out their argument very intelligently. The Big Ten kind of piecemealed it. Half the crossword puzzle wasn't put together. And maybe I know their fan bases are different, but nobody got a satisfactory explanation. And, you have a new commissioner. The guy who'd have been there before, Jim Delaney, would have probably smoothed this over more quickly. Probably had better connections in the media to deal with it, maybe even get a few people on his side, certainly with ADs and university presidents. It looks like they're coming back, and I would not invite them to the playoff if you're starting 5 weeks late. That's going to be another gargantuan argument over that. But I think that was the problem. Honestly, it came down, as dumb as it sounds, it came down to marketing. They didn't market it well, period.
That's funny.
I want to say, too, Dave, thank you for your many appearances on the show. I always feel, just a tremendous level of comfort when I see Dave LaMont, 735. I know I'm only going to have to carry a segment or two on my own, and then you're going to bring your brilliance in. And you're super generous with your time. Otherwise, we would have never considered doing this. Because our reputations can only go further down into the gutter. But nonetheless, it's always been great having you on the programs. You do a tremendous job, and you're one of the best communicators out there. I think you're the best play-by-play guy on the ESPN ABC roster, and I mean that in all sincerity. It's always a pleasure when you're doing a game. You can tell right away it's your voice, dynamic as always, and your style. And thanks so much for always being a guest on our show when we call.
Well, we'll do it again sometime. I look forward to hearing from you guys again. And when look, to our audience out there who are going to see this show live or going to watch it later, when you think of dumbass arguments, this is your threesome right here. We have mastered that art. Mike Lubitz, Jeff DeForrest, Defo, the Defo Show, 9:40 a.m. and 12:30 The Zone, Monday through Friday, 6 to 10, and on the iHeartRadio app. Boys, thank you for your friendship and your fellowship, and I'll talk to you again soon, I'm sure.
Love the graphics. Thanks.
Yeah, I know. And needless to say,
that's big time.
I didn't do it. In fact, as we're signing off, thanks to the Sports Objective podcast for all of the cool stuff you see here. And they took care of that for me. That'll do it. I'll be back with the Almost Daily Dave tomorrow at whatever time I can figure it what I have open. And I'll see these guys another time. Thank you all for watching. It'll be on YouTube, eventually. Take care.